I'll just get started with a little introductory information about myself, and people can trickle in then. If any of you were in the panel discussion this morning, you're probably already familiar with who I am. I'm Missy Andrews, and my husband Adam and I have 6 kids, and we are CenterForLit. We produce curriculum materials and literature to help parents have thoughtful conversations with their kiddos about the books that they're reading. Other things that you should know about me that might help you to connect and figure out who I am. I'm the granddaughter of a very hardworking farmer who sold the hogs so that his daughter, my mother, could be the very first in our family to attend college. Although my grandfather never progressed beyond the 8th grade himself, he learned enough in those short years of schooling to value education, and so he sacrificed to provide one for his daughter, my mother. She graduated cum laude and became a master teacher of English grammar, composition, and literature herself. She taught high school and junior high in the public school system for over 30 years before she retired to help my stepfather with his growing business. Her encouragement actually ended up sending him back to school for graduate degrees of his own. And the result of all of this learning is that I grew up in a home where education was valued. I was surrounded by words and books. My mother and I diagrammed sentences on napkins for fun at Pete's Parlors while we were waiting for our order to come. We read books together. I encountered my first Shakespeare play as a 4th grader because of my mother's love for the Bard. So that's a little background for me. After a secular high school education, I attended a very small independent liberal arts school in South Central Michigan, where I double majored in English literature and Christian studies, and I received an invaluable exposure to numerous other subjects and disciplines in the liberal arts vein. I met my husband Adam there. We married 4 days after our graduation and moved to Virginia Beach to pursue master's degrees at a Christian university there. Shortly into my first semester in the journalism department, I found myself pregnant with our first child, at which point I decided to put away my books and to be a stay-at-home mom. 5 more babies followed over the course of 9.5 years. Adam and I have been married for almost 32 years now, and our 6 kids have grown, bringing into our family 2, soon to be 3 daughters-in-law, a son-in-law, a grandson, a grandbaby who's brand new, and another one coming in October to be born to my oldest. And they're just the blessings of my life. I was having my coffee this morning, my phone rang, and I answered it to a video call from my 2-year-old grandson, who woke up this morning wanting grandmommy. That's the first time that's ever happened. And I think, I don't care what happens today. My heart was full to bursting. He's just the joy of my life. Now, as for our kiddos, Adam and I homeschooled them K through 12, beginning this educational experiment when our oldest Ian was only 2 years old. Now, after Ian's first day of formal homeschool, those of you who were in the panel discussion this morning, this will be a review. When Adam came home from work and asked how it went, "What did you learn, Ian?" He said, "I learned sit still, pay attention," with a total straight face to my 2-year-old. And true story, that pretty much says it all. That is a pretty good summation of where I was when I started homeschooling. My personality tends to be a little bit intense, and it certainly came out in the kids' schooling. I have had to learn how to temper this intensity with a healthy dose of moderation and reality. The first full year with all 6 kids homeschooling was like to kill me. It was much, much more than a full-time job. It consumed my waking hours. It invaded my sleep. At the end of the year, one of the other mothers in our homeschool co-op approached me at a Little League game. She had noticed, she said, how many titles I had covered with all the various age groups for the subject of literature alone. And she wondered if I needed any help the following year. Even I was surprised when I burst into tears. I had read, prepped and taught classes for 36 unique titles at 6 different reading levels over the course of that year, just in the subject of literature, while continuing to school my own 6 kids in their other subjects and the co-op's kids in conversational French and Christian worldview philosophy. I was about this close to a nervous breakdown. Looking back, I really can't imagine how I managed to get it all done. But it did get done. Day followed day and year followed year, and suddenly I was sending the baby of our family off to college to join his siblings. And now that same child is set to graduate in about 3 weeks. He has proposed to his college sweetheart, and he is headed to Westminster Theological Seminary next fall to pursue an MDiv in theology. Now, even with my work for CenterForLit and with our church, my husband pastors a church, I find myself searching for a brand new organizing principle that will structure all of the newfound blank space in my day planner and soften the quiet that feels too loud in my suddenly empty home. I'm put in mind of one of my favorite Christmas movies, White Christmas, if you all have seen that, in which 2 old Army buddies run into their old Army general, who's running a failing inn in Maine and wandering about rudderless without his task and his charges. They sing of him, "What do you do with the general when he stops being a general? What do you do with the soldier out of work?" And I feel like that sometimes. I feel like, what do you do with a homeschool mom when she stops being a homeschool mom? And what do you do with a homeschool mom out of work, out of kids, right? You see, my identity is still 4 years after the end of the child rearing and homeschooling project, all wrapped up in being Ian and Megan and Aaron and Molly Kate and Calvin and Charlie's mom. So that's who I am, what I am, and where I am. Now, let me tell you what I'm not. I am not a professional. Although I do have a master's degree in literature, I have no formal teaching certificate. Since marrying Adam, I have never worked full-time outside of my home. If I am a professional anything, I am a professional homeschool mama. My involvement in curriculum development and teaching within the homeschool community grew out of my response to a friend and fellow homeschool mother of 6 who, in an effort to combat her own feelings of overwhelm, came to me for help educating her kids in the classics. She's a really intelligent woman. She had a scientific education and held a nursing degree. Her lack of knowledge in the field of literature was becoming a stumbling block in her efforts to discuss the classics with her older children. She knew I had a lit degree. Could I help? Now, as I pondered her problem with complete understanding of the comprehensive demands of her daily tasks, I knew I needed to find some way to help her into a thoughtful study of literature that hopscotched over the years of training that I had pursued in college. She didn't have time to go back to college and pursue training, get a lit degree. She was too busy. When in between her laundry and housekeeping and taxiing and teaching responsibilities, would she shoehorn that in? She needed to learn the principles of good reading quickly so that she could begin the work of educating herself and her children simultaneously. And out of her need, our Teaching the Classics Basics seminar was born. I truly believe it was an idea inspired by God in answer to the needs of a growing community of homeschool parents who find themselves in my friend's dilemma. And I would be more than happy to share this tool for teaching literature with you at our booth after this talk. However, the subject of literature is narrower than what I hope to pursue in our conversation today. Today, I would like to discuss the broader topic of the Herculean task of home education. I've entitled my lecture today, Hercules Overwhelmed, the Quest for Success and Enoughness. And I don't think it's an overstatement to compare homeschooling moms with the Roman mythological figure Hercules, bearing the weight of the world on their shoulders. The burden of homeschooling can at times prove crushing in its effect. The question is, what is it that makes homeschooling so overwhelming? And I can already hear you thinking, Where do I begin? Time forbids me to mention. Let me tell you. And don't think that I don't know. Let's see if I can do it justice. First, homeschool moms do more than 3 full-time jobs. First, we are wives. And for some of us, this means that we are pulled into ministry roles outside of our homes. Still, we remain homemakers. It is our job to keep our households running smoothly. And to this end, we wear multiple hats. We're maids and chefs and interior decorators. We serve as chauffeur, driving people from place to place. We are executive scheduling directors, purchasing agents, hospitality coordinators, general helpers, errand girls, and head counselors. We are the very heart of our homes. Yet, in addition to this varied job description, homeschool moms also tackle the challenging job of the full-time primary educator. This involves another entirely different rack of hats. In this capacity, we must navigate a sea of curriculum choices as Director of Curriculum Development. We serve as registrar, preparing formal transcripts and records of our children's work. We are school teachers of multiple subjects that cross the fields of knowledge to encompass science and math, literature and composition, history and philosophy, religion and the arts. Each of these subjects requires preparation. You can't teach what you don't know, after all. Instruction of the kids, and then that tricky work of evaluation and record keeping, right? And those with multiple children teach the subject simultaneously at multiple levels. The reason we feel overwhelmed is obvious. It takes an entire staff to do this work in a traditional day school environment. Each discipline covered by a subject matter specialist, counselors and administrators tackling the discipline issues and communication between students and teachers and parents. We handle every subject, most often without any special expertise or training. We select the curriculum and manage the discipline problems to boot. We serve as registrars in charge of record keeping and credits. We are tasked with it all. In addition to the magnitude of this workload, we approach our tasks from a variety of backgrounds, some with little more than a high school diploma to aid them in this work. Still, I have spoken to many parents who confided that even advanced graduate degrees did little to prepare them for the task of homeschooling. Some, like my aforementioned friend, received a narrow, if rigorous, technical education and feel at sea in the humanities. Others, like me, struggle to teach the left brain subjects of math and science. And those of you who, like myself, were blessed enough to have pursued a liberal arts education might, like I, have graduated with a vague apprehension that all you'd learned was just the tip of the iceberg. That is to say, your education taught you primarily to recognize all that you don't know. Now, when I graduated with my own degree in literature and Christian studies, I was horrified to realize how little I'd really read. Even as a graduate of a quality school that roots itself in the classics and the great books, I felt just a little bit like a fraud. I mean, I hadn't read everything. I hadn't even read most things. In college, what you're taking primarily is survey courses, and these rely primarily upon excerpts and poetry and essays. So I had read only a few complete works, and even fewer novels. Dogged by this, I began a relentless pursuit of the classics. As I changed diapers and scrubbed toilets and disciplined children, I read Dante, Tolstoy, Homer, Dumas, and Augustine. And with each book I crossed off my reading list, I wondered, how much is enough? That is, what constitutes the magic number of classics read to my credit that makes me worthy of my degree, that makes me educated? And isn't this the fundamental question that we are all faced with in our homeschools? Isn't this one of the main burdens that we carry? How many books are enough books? With every new book list that we discover, our task grows. The more we learn, the more we discover we need to learn. You see, the body of knowledge to be mastered in today's world is mammoth. I heard Susan Wise Bauer once reference the idea of the Renaissance man. You guys have heard of the Renaissance man? And point out that the use of the term today is completely anachronistic. That is to say, it dates a particular time in history when the body of written knowledge available for mastery was of a very manageable size. One could, in fact, read it all. And men like Leonardo da Vinci and Petrarch and their contemporaries did. These were the Renaissance men. But students today find things are a little bit different, don't they? Today's students face daunting quantities of books handed down through the ages. Classics span centuries. What's more, publication today is so easy as to have somewhat lost its significance. With the advent of the internet, anyone can publish a book. While in some ways this technology represents a tremendous opportunity and blessing, it also admits a brand new problem for the student. Which of these countless written works are to be deemed worthy of time and thought? That is to say, what makes a classic? And once you've discovered the worthy books, which ones on that list should you study? There are so many. Of the making of books, there is no end, said Solomon, and I'm telling you, he wasn't kidding. Even if reading were your only task, which of course it isn't, it would be impossible to read every one. Add to the classics the boundless information of the internet age. Facts abound, and the quantity of facts necessary to garner the term educated is as varied as the book lists. Various homeschool sites propound various methods and offer various guidelines of what every child should know. Whom do we believe? Which book list is the best one? Which expert should we follow? Their columns appeal to our guilt, our fears, and our sin natures. This one is prep-free. This one demands excellence. That one promises virtue. One forgoes teacher involvement of any kind. Another lets the uneducated student choose his own course of study. Yet another totes a challenging book list that has little Billy reading Herodotus' histories and Plato in the 8th grade. There are as many different perspectives concerning the proper pedagogy and content of a quality education as there are people in this room. Their well-meaning voices in our ear often provoke indecision and insecurity in our hearts, causing us to jump from curriculum to curriculum. We try this and that, looking for the magic formula that equals an outstanding education. And this jumping around inevitably leads to feelings of guilt and doubt. And surely there will be gaps, holes in our children's education. Have you ever said this? To this effect, I've talked to many homeschool parents who, when their kids near graduation, are racked with fears that they haven't done enough, that they haven't done it right. Will their children be prepared? Will they be accepted into college, into the workplace? Will they make a living? Will they be successful? We feel it all depends on us, and we feel it very deeply. Because we are Christians, we know that this is not literally true, but our long to-do list suggests that the fear is not entirely baseless. That is to say, we do have a job to do, and it is difficult. What's more, in addition to all of these things, we face personal limitations beyond our various degrees of education or lack of it. We are limited by time, by money, by personal abilities and interests, and by our community resources. In our efforts to give it all to our kids, some of us live in our cars, trailing back and forth from athletic events and music lessons and enrichment opportunities. Others worry about the lack of opportunity in their locale for extracurriculars like these. We exhaust ourselves in our earnestness. We are indeed Hercules, bearing our children's worlds upon our shoulders, entirely overwhelmed. Okay, you say, you've identified the problem, but what's the solution? Tell me, if you're able, what to do about it. Even as I prepared to share with you today, I knew that when it came to it, When you would ask that question, what you would really be hoping for is a shiny new list of particular things that you could do to ease your burden and ensure success. You want a list of homeschool hacks. And I do have some. I have homeschooled long enough to have a bag of tricks up my sleeve that just might help you in your own work. And this is particularly true in the field of literature. But that is not what I intend to give you here and now. It's not what I think you really need, because I've been in your shoes. I have scouted for the next easier curriculum that will solve all my homeschool problems. And I have looked for the hacks that would streamline what seemed a ponderously slow process. Only it was never long before those new fixes became old, and I went looking for another. That's because a fix, a new curriculum, is not what I ever really needed. What I really needed was vision. The author of Proverbs tells us, where there is no vision, the people perish, and fools die for lack of instruction. My goal today is not to give you something else to do. Goodness knows you have plenty to do already. My goal is to give you something to think, to impart to you a vision for education that your shoulders can bear, even if you're not Hercules. Now, in order to do this, I want to ask you two questions. The first is, what exactly is education? And the second is, what is success? Now, it's evident that a quality education that equips our kids for success is the thing that we all desire, and we are willing to suffer deprivations in order to give it to them. Hadn't we better define those terms so we know what it is that we're about? The root of the word education comes from the Latin educere, which means to lead out or to draw forth. And this implies that the act of educating is one of leading a person out of or toward something. Now, we can guess from the origins of the word that education is something of a process or a journey. It's not an object to be gotten or a body of facts to be mastered. Rather, it's a quest toward something or a deliverance out of something. But what is that something? I suggest that your answer to that question will define the character of the education that you pursue with and for your students. Author and teacher Richard Mitchell discusses this idea in his excellent book, The Gift of Fire. And although it's now out of print, you can still find this book online to be printed on demand. In this book, Mitchell suggests that education is not an end in itself, but is instead the vehicle or process that we employ in our search for the real end, the truth. Truth is the object of education in all of its shades and expressions, and we pursue it through every subject and discipline. Furthermore, there is no end to this journey. There is no, as Mitchell puts it, last statement. He says this: we have as much hope of finding a last statement as of finding the largest possible number. The Christian knows this to be true, because the end of our quest for truth is the incomprehensible and immense God of the universe. The infinite God of the Scriptures is the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus tells us in John 14:6. And it is to the brink of this life-changing knowledge that we are called to lead our kids. For it's here, in the infinite face of God, that the details of our lives come sharply into focus. All truth eventually boils down to this: He is God, and I am not. The journey of education leads a person out of himself and toward God. And the goal of education is some proper knowledge of the self in light of God. Just to extend this metaphor of the journey for a moment, consider this. Anyone who has made a trip knows that the object of the trip is not the snapshots that you bring home from it, right? But rather the experience of the trip itself. In our analogy, books are like the snapshots that an author-traveler has taken upon his journey. And education is what he gleaned from the trip. Books are the recorded thoughts of an individual upon his own sojourn out of self and toward truth. I hope you can see that the subject of identity lies at the heart of the educational experience. And we'll come back to that in a minute. But first, just as books are the memoirs of men's journeys, book lists are a record of one reader's journey. They're photo albums of a sort, collages of the thoughts that he has pondered and the virtual conversations that he has had. They're like stick pins in wall maps, marking the important stops the maker of the book list has made on his journey towards knowledge and its better part, wisdom. Book lists and the books themselves are records. They're maps of the composer's educational voyage. Education, however, is what was gained in the voyage itself. The process of genuine education yields wisdom. Now, with this idea in mind, we use book lists in the process of educating our children in an attempt to duplicate the experience that led the book list author to become the educated, read, wise person that we assume that he or she is. The book list leads the child along a well-traversed path to think about things others have deemed worthy. We hope that they, too, find the worthy things that these books contain and imbibe the wisdom others have gained in their pages. Now, though I do not gainsay the usefulness of book lists in the process of education, I do think it's important that we think carefully, because education cannot be contained in lists of books, however good those lists might be. Education is the journey, not the list. The completion of book lists is what happens along the way to an education. It doesn't constitute the education. And the completion of a book list does not ensure that the reader will have the same experience as the one who created the book list to begin with. Education is much less mathematical than that. Education is something more than the acquisition of a body of facts or data. It has something to do with the maturation of a soul. And this is what many describe as a wonder, a miracle. Each book on a book list of merit represents an opportunity to gain insights about the way things really are. The nature of reality, the nature of man, the nature of matter, the nature of life, the nature of God. For example, the Iliad allows readers to observe bitterness and sin in man, unchanged since the age of ancient Greece. Jean Lee Latham's Carry On, Mr. Bowditch lets readers contemplate divine providence in the lives of individual men. Chaim Potok's The Chosen confronts the troublesome problem of pain. How could a good father God, allow his children to suffer? Leo Tolstoy's Anna Karenina lets readers contemplate the consequences of infidelity. You see, each novel offers an opportunity to reflect on realities that God has built into the world. Each lets readers experience a kind of vicarious awakening with its protagonist. As we read, we may notice that the bitterness that Homer relates in his Iliad is like the bitterness Elizabeth George Spear would relate in The Bronze Bow centuries later. We may recognize similarities between the nature of man described by Joseph Conrad in his Heart of Darkness and that described by C.S. Lewis in his Voyage of the Dawn Treader. We may compare George MacDonald's answer to the problem of pain and suffering with that of Chaim Potok. The more we see such connections, the more we begin to intuit the existence of the universal truths reflected in literature. And the more clearly we come to understand our world and ourselves. This is education. And this is what we want for our children. The proverbist says, as a man thinks, so is he. What we think about and how we think about it is of great importance, for it influences who we are and how we live. Our understanding of the nature of reality, the nature of man, and the nature of God constitutes the very most practical part of our lives. No discussion of methods could be more practical than this. No curriculum could be more useful. When these ideas about the nature of education began to crystallize for me, they changed everything. Let me explain. When my eldest son, Ian, started high school, I agonized putting together his book list. There were so many good options. Should I go with Mortimer Adler's reading list, use his Syntopica? Should I go with Susan Wise Bauer's list in The Well-Trained Mind? Or maybe I should use the Veritas Press list instead. Or maybe I should create my own, some synthesis of the best of each of these. I called an old professor friend from college and I posed a question. If you could prepare a child for your classroom, what would you have him read? Could you possibly take the time to consider and prepare a high school reading list for me? And this is what he said. No time required, he quipped. Got a pencil? Got a pencil? I mean, I thought, this man, he's very literate. He's read so much more than I could ever dream of reading. Got a pencil? Well, okay, so I scrambled. And this is what he said. He should read the Bible and 3 other works. A short list. His list included something by Augustine, either the Confessions or maybe City of God. John Milton's great epic, the English epic Paradise Lost. Both of those were favorites of his. I think he did his dissertation on Paradise Lost, so it was his pet project, you know. And then the third, was Richard Mitchell's The Gift of Fire. He said, have you read that last one? And I hadn't, of course. And he said, start with that first and everything will be clear. I was stymied. One laborious trip through Mitchell's book liberated me entirely from the tyranny of book lists, because it underscored for me the flaw in my concept of education. I had been functioning as though education was a list of books or a body of facts to be mastered, and I was driven to complete it with and for my son. But if education is instead a lifelong journey into truth, then it's not a book list. Neither is it a finite body of facts to be memorized. Our task as homeschool parents, then, is not to be sure and cram all the important facts into our students' heads, or to be sure that they've read all the right books. Rather, it is our task to equip our students for a lifetime journey further up and further in, as C.S. Lewis puts it, and to hold their hands and walk along the path together with them. Dorothy Sayers calls this act one of recovering the lost tools of learning. And she describes the process in great detail in her essay by the same title. That is The Lost Tools of Learning. You can find it online for free. For Sayers, the various disciplines represent opportunities not to teach a child the facts, but to teach him how to think. She describes this as a kind of 3-stage process. And this is all the list that you're going to get from me today. So you got a pencil? In the first of these stages, the child is acquiring a basic knowledge of the stuff of the world. He's soaking in facts, and he isn't much concerned yet with how they fit together. In the second stage, the child begins to try to arrange and connect these facts in a logical way. That is, to argue to an order of the facts for himself. In the third stage, the child learns to put the order he's found into words so that he can communicate his thoughts about them to others clearly and beautifully. But in each of these stages, the emphasis is not on mastery of the facts. The facts themselves are tools by which the child becomes equipped for further thought and study. Now, incidentally, this concept makes the information age your friend. rather than a menacing demon-like taskmaster. Information is at your fingertips as well as at your child's. It's unnecessary to keep every single fact in the universe in your or his head. Now, I don't mean to suggest that memorization exercises are not important. The exercise of memorizing data or poetry or what have you is a tool, too, by which their minds are exercised and trained to gather and retain important things. But you must see it as a tool to an end rather than the end in itself. No, they don't need to retain every single fact. Do you? If it's true that education is less about mastery and more about the acquisition of tools in the pursuit of wisdom, then maybe my professor friend was right. Maybe you can get a top-drawer education reading just the Bible and a few good books. Maybe it has more to do with how you read such books and what happens when you do than it does how many books you've read. Now, I hope you're thinking at this point, this sounds too good to be true. Because I haven't told you about the cost yet. And here's the catch. One who would guide the sleeping intellect of children into truth must first be awake and actively pursuing truth for himself. That is to say, if we are to act as guides, we must first blaze a trail. And that is to say, we have to read the books too. This task of educating our children is demanding, but it's not impossible. It is demanding, but it is not impossible. We must see that each classic book is an opportunity to discuss the permanent things with our kids. But we don't have to read them all. This is the reason my professor could suggest a list of only 3 books. They have a lifetime to continue to pursue the ideas that they discover in their brief time with us. Remember, education is a lifetime journey. We don't need to fear that we have to read every single good book with them before they graduate. Really, each classic eventually points to some facet of the very same truth, because all truth belongs to God. This realization can make us masters of the book list rather than slaves to it. You choose which important truths you wish to lead your child into thinking. Be free from the tyranny of other people's book lists. They are just good suggestions of thought-provoking statements other students made on their own journeys to truth. They are the great author's thoughts and musings on the eternal things. As Mitchell puts it, they are the novelist's manifestos on how to live, I think. Now, by keeping this fact at the forefront of my mind, it has become possible for me to navigate the sea of curriculum and the well-meant suggestions. I will never know it all. Neither will my kids. And somehow the admission of this fact is very comforting. God is God. I am not. He alone is the all-wise one. I must redirect my efforts towards equipping myself and my children to think rightly about the world in which we live and the God who made it and who we are in light of it all. And herein lies the link to that issue of identity and success that I mentioned earlier. We all desire to make something of ourselves, to be somebody. And we want our children to be successful, to be somebody too, don't we? In fact, as I mentioned in my last keynote, one of the unique snares of homeschooling is that we sometimes conflate our success with that of our children. If Johnny gets an A, we get an A. If he fails, we fail. The proof is in the pudding, right? Can you see how that kind of conflation muddies the already difficult waters of our journey? How appropriate is it for Johnny to carry the burden of making his mother successful? Isn't his desire to make himself successful heavy enough? And what of that success? What is success anyway? The world would have you believe that it lies in your bank account. Maybe you don't buy into that. Maybe you believe it has something to do with influence, respect, work. As long as your understanding of success is attached to your work will drive you. You will run on a gerbil wheel yourself, and you will crack the whip behind your children as they run too. But what if you're wrong? What if success isn't tied so directly to our work? Now, I am not suggesting that work is insignificant and that diligence isn't important. The Bible connects work with daily bread as a necessity. I'm talking about something more fundamental than that. I'm getting at the conflation of success with being somebody. I'm talking about the cultural assumption that we are what we do. But what if identity doesn't come from our doings? The 17th century poet John Milton wrestles with this idea of success and identity in his very short 14-line sonnet on his blindness. You see, he'd gone blind in middle age, long before he ever penned his magnificent English epic Paradise Lost. And in this short poem, he asks, how is he, the poet-seer, to write blind? And would God punish him for failing to produce in this new darkness? He asks it this way: doth God exact day labor, light denied? And he follows it up with, I fondly ask. When you read 17th century English, you soon discover that fondly, though today it means affectionately, in the 17th century meant foolishly. And he has Patience respond to this question. He writes this, but Patience, to prevent that murmur, soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke? They serve him best. His state is kingly. Thousands at his bidding speed and post or land and ocean without rest. What does he mean here? God doesn't need your work, John, Patience says. He's a king, after all, and the earth is his. He has legions of angels to do his bidding, and they are at his beck and call. But don't worry. They also serve who only stand and wait, he says. Doing isn't being, Milton's Patience replies. Identity and success are not directly tied to work. These things have more to do with our Creator than with our behavior. Here is the greatest relief I know to reduce the stress associated with the homeschooling project. Know this. Your children are not construction projects whose future depends on the skill of you, their craftsmen. They are individuals created by God who knows them and has plans for their lives. He is the master maker, and they were, as you were, known and loved before they ever drew a breath. Their identity, your identity is rooted in Christ Jesus, who created all things and who holds all things together. In him we live and move and find our being. The scriptures make it clear that true success comes in knowing Jesus Christ, his condescension in incarnation, his perfect life, his imposition on our behalf, his gory, vicarious death, and his glorious, suggestive resurrection. He is life and light and truth. He is Lord. Simply standing in his presence at the ready, waiting, is success. All is gift. All is grace. Now, when we know that our identity and success are hidden in Christ Jesus, whose intentions were made known to us in his loving life and gracious death, our activities cease to enslave us. Teaching loses its power to name us. Our children's performance in classes ceases to name them or us by extension. Instead, these activities become opportunities to discover more about God and the world that He made. They become opportunities to rejoice in His good gifts, to discover the gift that He intends to make of us to our communities, and the gift this usefulness in His kingdom will be to us. What joy! Imagine the tenor of a homeschool day not driven by the list. Imagine approaching the subjects not as tyrants to be mastered that will eventually name you a success or a failure, but rather as windows into the nature of reality and the God who made it. Are you still waiting for the homeschool hack and all of this philosophical hogwash? I regret that I cannot solve your scheduling problems for you. I cannot help you with your mountains of laundry. I cannot relieve the pressures of normal family life. Nor can I do your prep work for you. All I can do is try to help you see things differently. Remember, where there is no vision, the people perish. My hope is to give you vision for your task that will lighten your load, not only experientially, but also spiritually. In my own experience, sometimes it's the latter of these, the spiritual load, that makes my burden impossible. On a day-to-day basis, I can do the dishes. I can manage the laundry. I can read the books. It's the burden of anxiety that I carry in my heart that overwhelms me. It's the ability that these tasks have to name me that dogs me. And I give them that power when I look to them for my identity. Whatever you look to for identity becomes a demon that devours you whole. There is only one God. And when we look to Him for our identity, those things that we idolatrously pursued cease to be demons, and they become what they were always meant to be. Activities, blessings, opportunities to discover truth in relationship with our kids. My father-in-law is a preacher, and he likes to tell the story of two men out digging a ditch in a downpour. A passerby asks the men what they're doing, and the first man says, "I'm digging a ditch. What's it look like I'm doing?" The second man smiles and says, "I'm building a cathedral." The job of home education and parenting has a lot in common with ditch digging in a downpour. Let me say that again. The job of home education and parenting has a lot in common with ditch digging in a downpour. So we must always keep before us the vision of the cathedral that we are laboring to erect in the minds of our children. It is a cathedral that goes up over centuries, right? A project much too big for us to accomplish alone. Our work is to dig the ditch before us and to keep in our mind's eye the cathedral that the Lord is making of us living stones as we deal with muck and mud. He says it this way: as you come to Him, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 2, verses 4 and 5. We must see things differently. Remember that education, real education, is not the accumulation of facts. It is not a book list. It is not knowing everything. Simplify your goals. Mine those simplified opportunities to the very bottom of their usefulness instead of pushing ahead so that you can get through your list by some deadline. Here's a practical idea. If 6 books a term are too many to discuss thoroughly and well, read 3. If 3 are too many, read 1. Let the students read the other books for personal enjoyment and edification. Not every book needs to be studied to the same degree. Let the subjects you study together be studied deliberately, but recognize that deliberate study is time-consuming, and don't overextend yourself or them. Remember that the mastery of facts does not necessarily equal an education as we've defined it today. More isn't necessarily better. I have known many intelligent men, minds crammed full of facts, that have nothing like a genuine education. What they have is information, lots of it. There's a difference. Now, I urge you instead to begin your own composition of, as Mitchell put it, how to live, I think. If not formally, then in mental dialogue. Begin to reference the thoughts of earlier pilgrims, those fathers of your mind, like my professor was a father of my mind, and ask them for their own life manifestos. Perhaps they will give you a book list as life-changing as the one my professor gave to me. Our destination is to know the truth, which will set us free, to know God, and to derivatively know ourselves better. Then grab your child by the hand and run ahead into the pursuit of that truth, pressing further up and further in. Thank you. Now, if there are questions about this, I would love to talk about these ideas with you. How much time do we have? Do we have about 10 minutes? Okay, great. I'm glad that there's enough time to take a couple of questions. Do you all have questions about this? Or anything else that I've talked about this weekend? Yes.
I think just in like the, kind of what you're talking about is like the renewing of yourself, because you can't pour into your kids if you're not renewing. So like,
Yes.
What have you found for like a daily routine for yourself? How do you keep yourself as a mom and then as a responsible mom like filled up, with
Yeah.
the Lord and then with maybe something else that you figured out?
Yeah. Did you guys hear that? Could you all hear her? She says, this sounds like this has a lot to do with renewal for mom, and it certainly does, right? As a man thinks, so is he, right? Ideas have consequences. Bad ideas have bad consequences. So what we think in our minds has a consequence in the way that we live, the way we educate our kids, and the way that we think about our world and them and success and all kinds of other things. So it is really important to be rooted in something that renews us regularly. And as Christians, we believe that's the Word of God, right? And that's very broad. It's a very broad answer to your question, but there's really no substitute for being rooted in the Word of God. I'm not suggesting that the PQT is the be-all and end-all of your existence, or that your identity in Christ is attached to the personal quiet time. Only that I've found the personal quiet time, that is my time in the Word, to be renewing for me. The Lord is the light of my life and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? This is Psalm 27, verse 1, right? Things like that ground me and root me and remind me about who God is and who I am. And they have a universal application in my life. They work themselves out in my life in a variety of ways. I think it was Martin Luther that said that he forgot the gospel while he was sleeping every night. So he needed to remember the gospel every single morning, because putting the gospel on is the thing that equips us to live in reality, remembering who we are. And who we are, you know who we are? Who are we? We're the beloved. We're the ones that Jesus has already prayed over. Not one of these will I lose. That's what he said. And in being the beloved, in having his name, that name that Adam talked about this morning when we were doing the panel discussion, the well done, good and faithful servant. This is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased. Did you know that proclamation was given, it was spoken over Jesus at the baptism before he began his ministry? Think about that. Before he did anything. This is my beloved son. In him I am well pleased. What if you let that sink down into your heart today? What if you let that grow and root you in the educational process? What if you assumed that identity and you lived out of it? Suddenly, education is not a situation that I can fail and then I'll be nothing, right? Or what if he doesn't get an A on this achievement test? What's going to happen? Oh no, then they'll know. Everyone will know that I'm not that great a teacher. I'm a failure. No. Those tests are useful for some things, but not for identity. Not for success and enoughness. That only comes from a proclamation that was spoken over you before you were ever born, from the foundations of the world. He knew you. He planned you. He saw it all. And he created you anyway. How about that? And when Jesus hung on that cross, what did he say? He said, "It is finished." Hold on to the finished work of Christ. That's what I would say to you. Remind yourself every morning of the finished work of Christ that secures your identity and that secures the identity of your child so that they're already a success. And this homeschooling thing is just to familiarize them with the way things really are, right? And who they really are, and to equip them for whatever it is that the Lord has already in mind for them to do, right? He knows the plans that he has for us, to prosper us and not to harm us, to give us a future and a hope. This is what he says, right? We can trust him with that. And boy, if it's not an issue of naming, right? If this educational project can't name us and can't name them, then suddenly it's just a joyful process that we get to share with our kids. It's fun. And I would say, sometimes it's not fun. Sometimes it's drudgery. It's dry as dust learning, right? Sometimes it's conflict, because part of learning about the way things really are is coming up against ourselves and recognizing that we're not the center of the universe, right? That is a necessary leading out. Because when we're born, we're pretty sure we are, right? What do the babies do? Well, they expect the world to revolve around them, and for a time, that's appropriate. But we don't want them to still be thinking that when they're 16 or 50. Heaven forbid, right? It's a process of leading out. Leading out. Are there other questions? Yes?
What's the greatest lesson you could teach a child?
The greatest lesson you could teach a child. Did you hear my husband speak yesterday about his education in an hour? Yeah, I am not God, but there is one. There's God, and I'm not him. That is humility, right? The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I think that's the main thing. And all the rest grows out of that. Without that kind of understanding education and the stuff that we do that constitutes the process of educating can only serve to puff your child up, right? It'll make them proud. And that's not who likes a proud child and know it all? No, thank you, right? Other questions? Yes?
When you talk about boundaries, just trying to do it all, but making boundaries for yourself, I struggle with that.
Oh, me too. I can tell you my mistakes and my failures. I can't tell you how to do that well. Every year, when it was time to put together next year's offerings, I was like a kid in a candy store. I loved this stuff. It was like my drug. I'd sit down with my books and, what am I going to put? I'm making a banquet for my children. Let's fill it up. Let's amplify more. And I would put together these curriculum lists. One year, and I have to say, to my shame, this was my youngest child. Okay, I had 6 opportunities to get this right, and I was still doing this with my 6th child, okay? So I'm telling you, do as I say, not as I do. With Charlie, when he was in high school, he was a student athlete participating in public school athletic programs and still homeschooling. Before he would go in, he was supposed to drive himself a half an hour to the school every day for his practices. Before he left, and he usually left around 2, he had 11 subjects to cover. How practical is that? More's not better. And I can't tell you, I got to the end of the educational process, and education is like, have you guys ever read After Apple Picking by Robert Frost? It's a poem about an orchardist who's been up there climbing and picking apples. And he says, but I am done with apple picking now. He's done. And there's still some fruit up there that he wishes he could reach. And then there's a lot that fell to the ground, and it's all bruised and looks wasted. But he's done now. He still feels the sway of the ladder that he held, right, as he did this thing. He knows that in his sleep, he's still going to be thinking about those apples, thinking about those ripe fruits that he could have grabbed. But he's tired. He's overtired from the harvest that he himself desired. This is the homeschool experience for mom, right? Oh, so tired of this apple picking. But they look so ripe and red and juicy. You just don't want to leave any of them up there. But this is what my kids said to me. I read this poem the last day of my last child's homeschool with a real mournfulness. I was there. There I was, last day. I'd been pushing for this, right, for years, like 26 years of homeschooling. What did it look like that last day? Well, he took a test. He turned in a paper. It was pretty ordinary. There was no ticker tape parade. There were no bells and whistles. It was super anticlimactic. And then there was all this stuff that we didn't get to do, and it was too late. And I mean, we had been pushing hard, cramming it in, more and more, harder, let's go, And still, what about the stuff on the ground? Bruised, left. By the way, the more I piled on, the more fell to the ground, because you can only put so much stuff on a plate, guys, before even the process of trying to eat it pushes other stuff off the edge. You know this is true in your daily homeschool experience, and you worry about it. Oh no, I really dropped the ball on that one. We meant to do that this year, but we didn't really get to it because real life got in the way, right? And I was just bemoaning this. And we do this podcast called BiblioFiles, and I was talking about this with my kids. And 2 of my children were present in the podcast. And do you know what they said to me? Mom, you're not thinking about this right. Because apple cider's good. Apple cider's good. It doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Not if it's not about cramming their head full of facts and not if it's not all on you to make sure that they know everything before they leave your home school, right? Apple cider's good. And the ones that are still hanging up there on the tree, they can go pick those themselves some other time. Not only that, there are going to be more apples in a new season, right? Rest. I think rest. That's the best I can do in terms of boundaries. I'm still learning about those. I empathize. Are there any other questions? Okay, I think we're probably to the end of our time here together. If you have questions in particular about literature or in the broader subject of homeschooling, I'm going to be at the booth until they close today. Thank you for coming and for your attention.